Greetings, everyone. Nice to be with you. The Blossoming of Awareness, verses 35 through 38 is our video today, this week. And we're getting close to the end of this text. There's, I would say, 2 more videos to go before we complete the text. So we're getting into some interesting stuff. Well, the whole thing's been interesting, but this next bit might be especially interesting. You'll see. So I just want to briefly mention a verse we already did, which is verse 35, and just to acknowledge that, I don't fully understand this verse, and I'd like to invite some of my Buddhist colleagues in the Tantric Yoga Now Facebook group to contribute their understanding. So I'll just read my translation again. The translation is secure, as I'm pretty darn sure that that's the right translation. It's the interpretation that's the problem. Okay. Start again. Vamadakshina sanchara bindu dvaya nigharshanat dvadashante mahashanti siddhairukta mukhagame. So I'll give a different translation this time than the last time, but not different in substantial meaning, just different in phrasing, just different in wording. So it is said, or it is taught in the oral tradition of the siddhas that the mahashanti arises in the dvadashanta, or at the point of the dvadashanta, this point above the head at the upper limit of the energy body. Due to the fusion or collision or friction of the pair of bindus moving on the right and left paths. So that's just a slightly different way of phrasing the same thing from last time. Hi, everyone. And I just want to maybe just check out for a moment in the Sanskrit dictionary this somewhat rare word, nigarshana, and see if there's some other meanings that are relevant. Friction. There don't seem to be any other meanings that are relevant. However, what's interesting is this is certainly a term that could be used for sexual activity. So that itself is interesting. I don't think that this is a veiled sexual practice. I just think that there's a reason that Vīranātha, our author, wants to compare this friction and merging of the 2 bindus with sexual union. So elusively, it's not a direct comparison. It's just an illusion because the word nigarshana could more commonly be used for some rather more villagey activities, shall we say. But the part that's confusing, and the reason I'm calling for help from my Buddhist colleagues, is specifically that I've seen in some Buddhist sources this idea of 2 bindus moving in the right and left channels. Now, of course, we know that this is an allusion to prana and apana, the 2 dominant prana vayus in terms of the system of prana vayus, inhale and exhale. They're also, apana is also responsible for elimination and the diaphragm's ability to move down. It's responsible for, it's the energy with which women give birth. And prana, the exhale, is also associated with surrender to the divine, surrender to the absolute. So definitely these two bindus. Bindu usually means a point of ultimacy, or a ball of light, or a point of light. So it's an esoteric yogic term for sure. And what's unusual in Shaiva sources is to see the prana and apana called bindus. That is unusual, but I have seen it a few places in Buddhist sources, not ones that I can remember, just ages ago. So I wonder if some of you guys can speculate on other ways of interpreting this verse, or rather deepening our interpretation. But anyway, what it is talking about is prana and apana moving in the right and left channels. And usually those channels terminate at the bridge of the nose. So these Pingala and Ida channels do not go further than that. So how do we reach the crown of the head in this particular yogic practice? Well, Vīranātha doesn't tell us. I know Christopher Tompkins has some theories about this verse, which I don't actually remember what they were, but you could ask him, for those of you who follow his work also. But certainly it's saying that, it's a causative, due to the friction and fusion of these two bindus that had been moving in the right and left channel. Perhaps the merging is here, and then the energy rises up. So I'm speculating a little bit differently from last week. The merging could very well be here, where the channels terminate at the third eye, and then the energy could rise up. Because certainly it's also saying that this great peace, Mahashanti, occurs at the upper limit of the energy body. So it is taught in the oral tradition of the siddhas. And if anyone's had an experience that corresponds to this verse, or might, then please do share that. We would love to hear about that. Okay, let's move on to verse 36. Now, this is a new verse. And this verse is interesting because it seems to have an allusion to two different yogic practices in one verse. And this verse is also, one is not sure of the interpretation, but in this case, because the Sanskrit is corrupt, meaning to say scribal copying over generations has introduced some errors into this verse, and it's hard to say what the original reading was. So that's what corruption means, by the way, is scribal errors that are obvious to a Sanskritist. You know that Vīranātha, you know about how good of a writer he is, you know that he couldn't have written nonsense, and so you know that there are scribal errors. Okay, so, for example, in the manuscripts, we see, we see akramate when he must have written akramato, because akramate doesn't make any sense, and he's an author who writes sense. It's just like when you notice a typo, but here it's handwritten, so it's quite easy to have a typo. And then there's a word in this verse that that is different in different manuscripts. So therefore we say the phrase we use as philologists is that the text is not secure, because we see for this word, for example, two manuscripts have udgatanta, and one manuscript has gadgatanta, and one manuscript has udgamanta. So there's all different readings, which tells you the scribes were not sure what was going on in that particular point in that particular verse. However, we'll have a crack at interpreting it, and the verse is as follows. Urdhvam akramato vayor udgatante shamo bhavet puryashtaka vibhedepi tathaiva manasolayaha. So we can be relatively sure about the interpretation of this verse everywhere except in one word, and there, I think, we can make some educated guesses. Let me just paste the English. Okay. So first we have Urdhvam. I haven't pasted the Sanskrit because I don't have it. I don't have it in a. I only have it in a PDF form right here. I don't have it in a pastable form. Urdhvam akramato vayor udgatante, or perhaps udgatante shamo bhavet. What does that mean? Gradually, akramato, gradually proceeding upward, urdhvam, vayor udgatante. Now, the question is, what's the word here? So if it could be, I mean, Torella proposes udgatante for a solution to this textual problem, which would mean at the end of the rise of the prana, at the end of the exhale, or at the end of the prana shakti moving up the central channel. So one question we have here is the word vayu, is it referring to prana in general, or is it referring to the exhale in particular? Hard to know. But perhaps we should have a different reading, and perhaps it should be udgatante, which means at the end of an udgata, which is a technical term in Shaiva yoga. So udgata, and you guys will find this very interesting, especially those of you who have had strong kundalini experiences. And udgata is when the energy surges up the central channel so powerfully and so rapidly that it actually strikes the interior of the top of the cranium so forcibly that the body does that. There you are sitting in meditation, and the energy surges up, hits the inside of the top of your skull, and your whole body jumps as much as an inch or several inches off your cushion. So that's called udgata. And there are certain yogic practices that are said to be, you shouldn't do this practice unless you've had at least one udgata, or unless you've had at least 3 udgatas. So this is something that, these days is fairly rare. It does happen, but those days apparently was more common because it's frequently discussed and mentioned. So I'm not sure that Torella knew this term at the time he proposed the reading udgatante, but I'm saying, instead of at the end of the rise of prana, it could easily be udgatante, at the end of an udgata, this special yogic experience. So let me just type in the window so you can see the difference between these two terms. It's fairly small. Okay, so these two compounds. So in the verse, it's either udgatante, at the end of the rise of prana, or it's udgatante, sorry to bump the computer. There you can see the difference is fairly small between those two words. And we can dismiss, obviously, just silly readings like gadgatante, which doesn't mean anything. So I'm just trying to let you guys in a little bit to the world of textual scholarship and textual analysis, and how it's really fairly difficult sometimes to know what the original author wrote. And so what I want to tell you, and I've mentioned this a couple times before, but what I want to tell you is that when somebody presents a text as if they totally understand everything in it and there's no ambiguities and there's no textual problems, then they're either deceptive or ignorant, because there's always textual problems. There's always going to be a handful of verses at least where you're not sure what the original author wrote, and you have to do some detective work, and you may very well be wrong. And so what we're trying to, the newer generation of scholars is trying to acknowledge more explicitly how often we're actually in the dark, so that we don't have this sort of false sense of authority of like, oh yes, I have mastered this, because there's progress. There's always, as my first guru said, there's always progress and never perfection in terms of our mental ideas about the word perfection. Of course, at a deeper level, there's always perfection, right? But in terms of something like this, getting at the meaning of a text, you can always make more progress, and you can never be absolutely sure that you know what the original author wrote. That's called philology, the science of textual criticism. It used to be the most respected science in the entire academic world 100 years ago. And those times have changed. People like me were the most respected people in the whole university 100 years ago. Philology was the #1 academic subject, and now people don't even know what the word means. So times change fast in 100 years. But thanks to you guys, I can still make a living. So anyway, let's finish the verse. So at the end of this rise of prana, or at the end of this udgata, shamobhavet, you experience total peace, total tranquility. Okay? And then he seems to go on to say something different in the second half of the verse, or maybe they are related. Let's see. So the second half of the verse is puryashtaka vibhedepi tataiva manaso layaha. Likewise, or in a similar way to the prana dissolving up here at the Dwadashanta, the mind dissolves when the subtle body is pierced or broken open. So here we have another mystery. Now here the text is more secure, meaning the manuscripts all read the same thing. So we can be pretty sure that this is indeed what Vīranātha wrote. But what the heck does it mean? When there is the piercing or breaking open of the subtle body, then in a similar way, the mind dissolves. That's the literal translation. That's exactly what it says. Yeah. So what it could be referring to is successfully piercing the granthis, these knots in the subtle body that lie beneath certain major chakras. Or it could be just talking in a general way about the sort of breaking open experience that can happen in spiritual practice, where you feel like you're constricted and contracted and have all this armor on you and are sort of disconnected from reality because you have so many walls, and then big breakthrough happens that seems to sort of tear down the wall, as Roger Waters said, and or just break things open in a big way. And then the sort of the mind, by which he always means the conditioned neurotic thinking mind, dissolves. It just subsides into the experience of pure presence. Okay, so the question is he talking in a very general way here, or is he talking in a more specific way? Is he alluding to a specific practice like granthi piercing with the nada suchi, the sound needle of vibrating the kundalini bija and uchara practice? Maybe he's talking about that. And some of you know exactly what that last sentence meant, and some of you don't, and that's okay. I can't take the time to explain it now, but it will be explored more when I do my online kundalini course. So, by the way, those of you who are watching on YouTube, once again, you can see the text in Sanskrit and English. It's not all up yet, but it will be on my blog site. So, just to say that. Okay, let's move on to the next verse. We don't have any certain interpretation of 36, and that's fine. That's totally fine. So 37, very interesting. Okay, this time I do have the Sanskrit and transcribe it. So there's the Sanskrit bhasha, and here's the English. Now, here again we have a verse that where the text is not secure, so we don't know for sure what the meaning is. So let's explore a couple possibilities. Okay. So first we have Vivaryasyam kshanam stitva nisandigdham manakulam stambhita prana vrittestu nirodha samprajayate. Everything hinges on this first word. Now, Torella, the Italian scholar who worked on this text before me, conjectures that the reading here should be vivarya, having opened. Now, what do we find in the manuscripts? Well, we find a bit of a mess where the scribes, don't seem to be sure of the reading. But we have 3 manuscripts that read nidarya and a manuscript that reads vicharya. So vicharya means having contemplated, having reflected. But the problem is that doesn't fit the context, that doesn't fit the verse. So it's a perfectly legitimate word, but it doesn't quite work. Nidarya doesn't mean anything. We find it in 3 manuscripts. And it could be that those 3 are all copied from one manuscript that had that reading, because it's unlikely that 3 different scribes would make the same mistake independently, very unlikely. So probably we're looking at that those 3 go back to one. Nidarya, could Nidarya be anything? Not that I can think of. Okay, so that's why Torella proposed Vivarya to try to make sense out of the verse, because once again, we know that our author must have written sense, not nonsense. So Vivarya, having opened or opening, and there I've put the English translation. So this is one possible interpretation of this verse. Opening one's mouth and throat and remaining like that for an instant, free of doubt, confusion, or agitation. The activity of prana is temporarily stilled, due to which cessation, nirodha, then arises. What might this be referring to? Well, it might actually be referring to something very specific, which is a practice called divya karana, the divine posture. And I actually give this practice all the time in all my videos. I just don't name it. And that's the practice of relaxing the jaw totally and relaxing the muscles of the face, head, and neck, and softening the eyes back in their sockets, and really allowing that tension in the jaw hinge to release. So you're relaxing the jaw so much that your lips almost come apart. And it's said in Shaiva Tantra that this is the most important part of meditation posture. So that's very interesting because it's almost forgotten today. And they repeatedly say in the text, they call it the divine posture, divya karana, for a reason. It's the most important aspect of meditation posture, to relax the jaw, to let the muscles of the face soften and go slack like the face of a sleeping child. Okay? So certainly, the word asya is correct. So mouth, so that's why Torella is saying vivarya asya, opening the mouth. That would make sense. And the textual scholar also has to consider, how did we get these errors? Could vivarya have been accidentally mistranscribed into vicharya and nidarya? Absolutely, it could have been mistranscribed in that way. So Torella, as a good textual scholar, is thinking, well, what word could have been mistranscribed into the words that we see? Okay, so let's now that we feel more confident in the reading of the verse, let's consider the full translation. Opening the mouth. And I put throat because we know from earlier in the text, he talks about having the yoni open throat in these yoga practices. But it's really, the word there is mouth. Opening the mouth, relaxing the jaw, divya karana, almost definitely means that. And remaining like that for an instant. Here, instant is hyperbolic. He doesn't, it's, when people say, hey, take a moment. It's that kind of hyperbole. They don't literally mean only take 1 second. They're just like, take a moment. It might be a few seconds, it might be a few minutes. In the same way, he's saying, remain like that for a moment and just completely releasing this sandigdha and akula, this doubt, confusion, and agitation. So I would say releasing the sense that you have to figure everything out. We think we'll be safe and well and everything will be okay if we can figure everything out. And it turns out that's not really the case. And if you rather release the notion that you need to figure everything out, then you can be available to the present moment more fully. And in that state, you're more likely to react appropriately, meaning beneficially, to what is. So letting go of trying to figure everything out, unless what you're dealing with is a purely intellectual problem, which usually it's not. So this state of sandigdha, this is where you're doubtful, dubious, uncertain, unsettled, inhibited, and so on. So he's saying, just let all that go. Don't try to figure anything out. You don't need to figure anything out. And let go of your agitation, breathe deep, relax the jaw, and in any given moment, the activity of prana could just suddenly pause, meaning the mind pauses, the breath could pause, everything just can come to a moment of stillness, even if it's just a moment. And in that moment, you taste, even just a little bit, you taste your true nature. And here, again, he's agreeing with Patanjali, even though he presents practices that Patanjali would have been shocked by, he's agreeing with Patanjali and saying, we must have an experience of internal silence and stillness in order to taste our true nature. So that's a through line in the tradition, meaning in the whole yoga tradition, not just tantric yoga. And that's worth working for. I mean, it's actually not work. It's the practice of undoing rather than doing, right? Of relaxing rather than striving. But that is a crucial element in all forms of yoga. There must be this experience of internal stillness and silence in order to experientially taste your true nature, in order to realize something fundamental about who and what you really are, something wordless and non-conceptual. Okay, we're about out of time. Well, we are out of time. Oh well, because the next verse is juicy. It's about it's a sexual practice, sort of. Is it or isn't it? That'll be interesting to explore next week, and we will explore that. But yeah, his next verse is parallel to verses 68 and 69 in the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra. So it's a practice having to do with sexuality, even if in and of itself, it's not exactly a sexual practice. So hopefully that little teaser makes everyone tune in next week. But it is very, very interesting stuff that we'll explore, and uniquely tantric stuff. Of course, you don't find stuff like this in Patanjalian type sources. Okay, so let's just remember that this free course on the Blossoming of Awareness by Vīranātha is made possible by the patrons on Patreon, whose support allows me to do more and do more free stuff. and allows me to be able to afford to have a personal assistant, which frees up more time. So thank you, patrons. Thank you for the whole, that Patreon platform is great, and we couldn't do it without you. So please continue with that support. We love it. And after this, we're going to do another free course. What will it be on? Who knows? I don't know. It'll be exciting to find out. So looking forward to being with you all more. Just 2, maybe 3 more videos in the Blossoming of Awareness series, and then we'll continue our exploration elsewhere. Love you all. Thank you for your generous emotional and psychic and spiritual support, as well as financial support. I feel it, and you guys are the greatest community ever as far as I'm concerned, and really, really amazing people, and I feel so lucky. Take care. Much love. Om.